Hello, here we go, Jane Thomason. If you need to know anything in artificial intelligence, you need to attend this today. You need to listen to this one today because I can guarantee that, like me, you will learn a lot. Jane Thomason, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure and an honor to have you. I was just wishing you would come on this show. Thank you very much for being here. Would you please introduce yourself to those eventually of our followers who haven't yet had the honor and the pleasure to get to know Jane Thomason, Dr. Jane Thomason?
Look, thank you. Um, I think what I'd like to say is that my life has been long, but where I find myself now is really in a role of trying to educate people about emerging technologies, about what's coming down the track, what we can expect, how it's going to impact on our lives. How I got to this point is another question, but I'd like to say I'm an educator, I'm a writer, I'm someone who tries to imagine the future and share it with people.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. Tell us, please, about what you do and where you see the future in 5 years for you.
So what I believe is that we're all given gifts and we all have the capacity to have an impact with whatever those gifts are.
Yes.
And I feel like the most valuable thing that I can be doing at the moment is being a bridge between the old world and the new and helping people understand how these new technologies are going to impact on them, but also what are risks, what are opportunities, what are things they should be thinking about. So increasingly, I've been involved in this since 2016. And increasingly, as my knowledge and experience improves and people see me as someone to listen to, then I hope that through some of my speaking, some of my lecturing, some of my writing, I can influence people in a positive way to be prepared for this digital future that we're going to have, that we're already in. But we should know how to make the most out of it, both for ourselves, but for humanity generally.
Absolutely. I'm very, very keen, very much like you, on making the best out of it while we keep it ethical. But let's go step by step. Let's first talk about the impact of the blockchain on the global social change, okay? In your book, Blockchain for Global Social Change, that I encourage everybody to read, you discuss the potential for blockchain to address global challenges. Could you share some real world examples where blockchain is already driving significant social change and how businesses can contribute to this?
Yeah, I'd like to just start by helping you understand what first moved me about blockchain, because I've never actually come from a crypto background. That's not why I got interested in blockchain. Why I got interested in blockchain was I saw how it could be applied to problems that we have in the world, whether it's financial inclusion or whether it's healthcare or whether it's food supply chains. And so I felt that this was a technology that is going to be the underpinning of a different future for us. And so that's why I started to get interested in it. And my background has always been in developing countries and in emerging economies where they have large amounts of people who are unbanked, who don't have access to energy, who don't have access to telecommunications, and people who are living in extreme poverty. So it was from that background that I suddenly could see how we can send money to people in a crisis, how the aid program and humanitarian programs that pay really expensive intermediaries to just look after money to get it to the recipients don't have to do that anymore if we start deploying this for the direct transmission of money, for example, in times of humanitarian crisis. We have huge problems with fake drugs in the world. And so blockchain's able to ensure provenance in medical supply chains. So it was all of these things that really inspired me to follow this technology. And so probably the first two I've kind of touched on. One is blockchain in humanitarian crises. And we've seen this in Afghanistan when the Taliban came in. We've seen this in in countries in South America where the bottom's falling out of their currency and people are turning to digital assets as a store of value. We've seen it in Lebanon because you can immediately, if there's a crisis, you can send money directly to someone so that they can get out of that setting. And we've never had that before. So that's the first one. And every time we see a humanitarian crisis, we start seeing how this is being used there, because you just need a simple mobile phone in order to be able to deploy it in that way. I think the second one is just the issue about financial inclusion and unbanked. And there are 1.5 billion people in the world who don't have bank accounts. They don't have bank accounts because they can't satisfy the identity and credentialing requirements to get bank accounts. But if they can have a digital wallet on a simple mobile phone, and remember 70% of the world's population now have mobile phones, then they don't need a bank account because they're going to be able to send, receive, lend, borrow money without having a bank account. So it opens up financial inclusion for those people. The third example that I'll come to, where I've seen some, really strong projects in India, is around supply chains for poor farmers and making sure we're getting transparency in the supply chain and they're getting paid fairly for their products. So there's so many different examples that I could give you, but they're the ones I'll start with.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for sharing this. I want to reflect, if you allow me, very frankly about the fact that you are a lady. And today, as you can see, we don't see as many women as men in advanced technology fields such as blockchain, Ethereum, Bitcoin, artificial intelligence. What do you believe the barriers are, and where do you see businesses being able to play a role in bridging this gap?
I think the barriers are multiple, and I think some of them are social, in that we don't necessarily, depending on our culture, because you certainly don't see this, for example, in China, where there's a lot of women engineers. In our culture, we tend to socialize women into the softer studies, if you like, not so much maths and science and engineering. We tend to focus them into the humanities. So I think there's a bit of streaming that actually goes on in schools. I think also women are probably less confident to brazenly get out there and do a startup and say, I've got this really cool product, give me, $100,000 and I'm going to build it. And I don't think that women are quite so willing to come out. I think they also can feel a bit intimidated, particularly with blockchain, because if you know blockchain and blockchain events, there's some very, very colourful characters who are involved in that. And it's been intimidating to go in and try and talk to people. And so I think we need a few things. I think, first of all, we really need, as a society, wherever we come from, really proactive, getting girls involved in STEM, in mathematics, in engineering, in gaming, all of those things that are going to enable them to get involved in technology. I think, secondly, we need to have role models and mentors for women who can show that, really prominent women who are well known in technology, who are doing startups, who are showing other women that it can be done, and also managing, because we can't change our biology. The men don't have babies, so women have babies, and they are often trying to juggle, having a family as well as having a career, and that can, interrupt them doing that. And then finally, and this is one of the areas that I'm involved in at the moment, is thinking about how to get more investment in women deep tech founders, because the investment significantly doesn't go to female founders, and trying to think about how to help the female founders be ready to receive investment, and how to find investors who are interested in and willing to invest in female founders is still a work in progress. But I think all of those things.
Maybe there is also a role for banks in lending money to make sure that women investors and women founders get at least the same chances as men founders. Okay, thank you very much for this. Jane, Myself, my family, my friends, people I know, businesses I know, more and more I hear, yeah, but where does it come from? Is it ethically resourced? Do we have any tracking on the supply chain? Supply chain tracking is becoming more and more important and more relevant, in my opinion, and what I find, both for people and for businesses. Tell, please, how do you see blockchain helping in supply chain transparency?
Well, I mean, we're seeing now quite a lot of organizations using blockchain in the transparency of the supply chain, particularly for provenance. So, for example, if you grow the finest Ethiopian coffee, you want to source that Ethiopian coffee, you have to be able to trace it from the coffee farmer in Ethiopia right throughout the supply chain to your coffee shop in Geneva. And so for that, the provenance of, for example, foods that are grown organically, because people are much more interested in organic food, being able to show, yes, that did come from that Swiss Valley where all of those beautiful dairy cows are, eating the green grass and never eating any, antibiotics or anything like that. So I think people are much more interested in where their food comes from and knowing that they're having ethically sourced food as well. So a lot of the big companies, we're seeing Tesco's and Carrefour and others are starting to use this, but also I think a lot of the boutique food operators who are using this ethically sourced food and who are interested in ensuring that, it really is Greek yogurt that you've got on your table that's come from Greece, or fish that's come from a non-polluted area. So I think increasingly this is going to be something that not only suppliers will want to do, but people will demand that they know where their food's coming from.
Absolutely, and not only food, if I may. It's really way more. I mean, I'm talking about people I know and businesses I know. They are really asking about everything from wood to how much would it pollute later on and how recyclable or biodegradable the product is. Okay, this is great. Thank you very much.
And the example I gave you from India, I think, is a really good example of that, because this is with cotton farmers cooperatives, and you're able to trace that right through to the point that the T-shirt that's made of the cotton from these Indian cotton farmers has a QR code on it, and you can see exactly where it's come from. So yes, any kind of materials. But I think you're touching on another point, which is not just around the ethics, it's around the sustainability of what we're doing in the building of the circular economy and sort of preserving what we have to look after the planet better. And there's a lot of different examples, where blockchain is an important adjunct for sustainability, whether it's in managing smart grids and renewable energy, as well as the supply chain aspects of it. So there's a whole lot of different applications of not just blockchain, but other technologies, because, you talked about AI in the beginning. We're seeing all these technologies converge. So you can't really talk about blockchain anymore without thinking about maybe it's augmented reality, maybe it's AI. We're seeing them all being used together. So I think we have to think about them together. And then if you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, 70% of the Sustainable Development Goals can be accelerated through the use of technology. So bringing technology into sustainability is a really necessary and important challenge.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's sustainability. It's also biodegradability. It's also the ethics behind. I 100% agree with you. For years and years, here in Switzerland at least, we were having articles and newspapers everywhere talking about big brands, I don't want to name them, that are said to be using children in manufacturers in some South Asian countries, fabricating our sports shoes and our sports t-shirts in very unacceptable conditions, in a very non-sustainable way, and maybe most shockingly using children for this work. So I was hoping you can shed a little bit more light. on exactly how the blockchain could help us exactly in this, like the sustainability and the traceability of the products. Would you kindly, please?
Well, but I will. But I think the one thing that I want to preface it with is that the community, the purchasers of those products, have to start demanding. A friend of mine worked on a really interesting project for a number of years, Brian Isserlin, called Slave Free Trade. And this was a blockchain project which was about eliminating modern slavery in supply chains, in production, and so forth. But I spent a lot of time with him, and one of the things that he said is that you can track and trace anything using blockchain, but unless consumers are demanding to see that, tick of confidence, if you like, that children haven't been used, that ethical sourcing has been used, and that they're not going to buy that product unless they can see that transparency, then it's not going to happen. So I think the technology can track it. There's no doubt about that. But until consumers start demanding it, then it's not going to take off. And I think that's really where the younger generation have a very important role to play, because I think they're very much more attuned to issues like sustainability and taking care of the planet. And they're also very digitally enabled. And so I think they're much more likely to start demanding this in the products that they buy. And I think sustainability will also be a brand value. So people become loyal to the brands that they love, whether it's Louis Vuitton or whatever it is you like, but they're going to start saying, okay, Louis Vuitton, I want to see where your products have been made, how they've been sourced, what kind of environmental degradation they've caused. Otherwise, I'm not going to love your brand. I'm going to love a sustainably sourced brand. So I think we'll see more of those changes.
That's absolutely amazing how you're putting the responsibility back in the hands of the consumer by saying you have to require that the product is certified and traceable and you can see. Absolutely impressive.
And I
I
think the
very much
same
like.
goes for the circular economy, because, especially people of later generations, they've grown up with expecting to change their fashion every year, change their shoes every year, change their handbags every year. And they don't think about the waste that causes or think about recycling that. And so we're starting to see that mentality, if you like, becoming much more prominent. So we need to see that demand.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for sharing this. I would like maybe to go one step back and ask you about how you have been deeply involved in Web3 and the blockchain technologies, and how you see Web3 reshaping our traditional business models. How could Web3 enable companies to unlock new growth opportunities in this digital age?
Yeah, let me start by saying the way that I look at Web3, and this is not my original thought, is that it's creating for us the next generation of the internet, which people are calling the internet of value, because what it allows us to do is directly exchange value peer to peer, whether they're content assets or digital assets or music and so forth. But so it allows people from anywhere in the world to be able to contribute, and I without intermediaries. So it means you don't have to go on someone else's platform to share your music, to share your artwork, to share your ideas. And so now what it's going to allow for us is, and I'm kind of excited about these new economies that are developing, that are going to allow people to interact, whether it's around fans or whether it's around food, people who love food and want to have a food verse, or people who are interested in travel and they want to create a kind of economy and interchange between travelers, sharing ideas and sharing experiences. People talk about the creator economy, rewarding creators for what they do. Suddenly, we have the tool to be able to directly reward and engage with people from all around the world. So in terms of business models, I think that the things that businesses need to think about is they come from a kind of centralized background. And if you think of gaming companies, for example, they build products and they make them available to gamers, and then the gamers play the products. What we're seeing now in Web3 gaming, for an example, is that the gamers themselves are starting to shape the future of the game. And you've got a whole lot of Web3 games that are being developed where the players are shaping the future. The players are able to be rewarded for their participation in the game. And we're starting to see games that are actually kind of owned, developed, and driven by the community. So those are the differences that we're starting to see moving into all of the industries. And then if you add it, you haven't asked me about metaverse yet, but I want to get some metaverse into the conversation and virtual reality. You're able to then create not only these economies, but these immersive experiences where the people can be interacting with each other all around the world and having exciting immersive experiences as well. So, Web3 opens the door to all of those possibilities. And recently, I've been doing quite a lot of collaboration and writing with the travel and tourism industry and the hospitality industry about how they need to rethink about Web3, about tokenization, gamification, NFT collections, and all of those things to build more customers, to build better brand loyalty with their customers. So businesses need to kind of rethink, is my business going to be killed because I'm still a Web2 business? How can I make that transformation, if you like, or start experimenting with Web3 and think about how I can build, what I'm doing into a Web3 model? And it's not going to be immediate, but a lot of businesses are starting to look at that and explore what they can do with Web3 and with metaverse, AI, VR, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that are all coming together there.
Absolutely amazing. Exactly. You were just a little bit faster than me. I wanted to ask you about the metaverse. For a while now, I think, I don't know, at least for me here, for the past 2 years, this has been really a very big hype. So everybody's talking about the metaverse and what's going to happen. And as you know, even huge multi-billion companies like Facebook rename themselves as Meta, referring to the metaverse. My question to you is, in your opinion, in your experience, what are the best chances for which businesses to make use of the metaverse for the future, and how exactly?
Okay, so let me start by saying the hype came from Mark Zuckerberg, who rebranded Facebook to be Meta. And he kind of appropriated the term, in my view, in an inappropriate way. So people started thinking that Meta was the metaverse, that there was going to be a metaverse and it was Meta, and that's clearly not correct. So I just want to make a couple of clarifications, because I think it's really important. There's not going to be one metaverse. There's going to be many metaverses that people are going to choose to participate in or not. And I think in terms of how people are approaching them, you've got Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft. They're all building their own immersive experiences, but in my knowledge, they're using the same business model as they've been using for as long as they've been around, which is they're taking your data and using it, and they're going to offer you an immersive service, and probably you'll use it because they've already got 3 billion customers around the world, and they say, come on in here and you can do this. So probably people will do that. And then separately, you've got, the Web3 metaverse people who are trying to build that open, decentralized metaverse where everyone gets rewarded for the value that they create within those metaverses. And then I think in addition to that, you've then got the gamers who already had many of the metaverse angles already in games. They already had fabulous immersive experiences. And not all of them, but some of them are now kind of adding the Web3 experience. So I think we're going to see, a lot more Web3 experiences in gaming. And then the industrial metaverse is becoming a really serious thing. So creating digital twins of aircrafts, of airports, of tourist destinations, of so many things, so that, first of all, you can test and try before you actually put it into production. So it's used quite a lot in production. but also so people can come and have an experience before they choose to physically go somewhere. So that's in travel and tourism. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that these immersive experiences are going to be incredibly important. And the two, I'm getting probably three sectors, but there's so many sectors that are really moving forward with this. One is in health. So we've already seen doctors making digital twins to prepare for highly complicated operations like separation of conjoined twins, and practicing with doctors from around the world, practicing the operation, looking at if they go in this way or that way and how's the best way to conduct it. That's already happening. If you think about in healthcare, education of students around anatomy, they don't have to cut up dead frogs anymore. They can go inside the human body and see how all the organs are connected and how the arteries are connected and so forth. So they can learn in a much more real and immersive way. It allows for scientific collaboration from around the world without people having to, they all used to go to Geneva to WHO, get on a plane from all around the world, create this massive footprint. Now it can be done without them having to travel and in a continuous way. So there's a lot in health, in mental health. Education's the big one for me, because we don't have to have schools anymore to the extent that we used to have schools. People are going to be able to receive education from anywhere if they've got access to the internet, to a mobile phone. And I think that that's going to transform education. It's going to transform education because it's going to be data-driven. It's going to be immersive. You're going to be able to track their learning. You're going to be able to reward their learning. It's going to be more exciting. And so, health and education are the two big ones really for me, where we're already seeing these kinds of advancements, and we're going to see more and more. And for certain aspects of it, it's going to create significant disruptions, particularly in consumer health. Not if you have a heart attack or you need a massive operation, but these issues about managing your hypertension, your diabetes, healthy lifestyles, doing exercise, managing your mental health. All of this is going to be vastly enabled through these kind of immersive experiences.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. As you're talking about it, and as you're putting one example after another, I'm just thinking of the possibilities. And I would like to ask you, how do you see the blockchain today changing our health systems? And what's on the horizon? What could the blockchain bring to our health systems in the near future?
Oh, well, look, so many things, and I've written quite a few things about this. But what I think is that it's going to be kind of like the underpinning infrastructure that we don't see. Because if you think of every kind of aspect of a health system, from billing systems, to the medical supply chains, to allowing people to receive value. So, for example, if you think about elderly and chronically ill, and everyone needs carers, and there's a whole lot of people who are kind of contributing to what I'm going to call the care economy. It creates the possibility that people in the care economy are going to be able to be rewarded for what they do. Carers can be rewarded, the doctors and the nurses, people who are sharing information about how they their loved ones and so forth. Everyone can be contributing to and can be rewarded in these communities that are created around chronic disease or around the elderly or around mental health. And the secure transmission of data is really important, and we actually saw that taking off during the pandemic. So blockchain is allowing this data to be moved securely in a de-identified way so that it can be made available. Making available data for drug discovery and scientific knowledge, decentralised science, assuring the fidelity of research trials and drug trials and so forth. So there's literally scores of places in a health system that blockchain is going to be able to improve and underpin what we're doing and make the health system more accessible and more effective and more efficient. And then you couple that with 5G, it's going to be instantaneous in the sense of what people are going to be able to access. in terms of their data.
That's absolutely amazing. And you can just think of the possibilities. Tell me, please, Jane, as the chair of Kazai Digital Assets, you are at the forefront of digital finance. How do you
Oh,
foresee the
just sorry,
role of...
you're going to have to pause me. There's someone ringing the door. I
Sure,
just have to
sure,
tell them to go away.
sure.
Sorry, I thought we could get through that without disturbance, but there's no do not disturb sign for the
Okay,
door.
Jane. It's okay.
Anyway, so
It's okay.
yes, ask the question again.
Right, yeah, sure. Jane, as the chair of Kazai Digital Assets, you're at the forefront of digital finance. How do you foresee the role of digital assets evolving in global finance? And what should businesses be aware of as they integrate digital assets into their operations?
So again, I want to answer that in two ways because blockchain and digital assets are closely related. So the first thing I think we're already seeing in banking and finance is that people are starting to deploy blockchain, not so much for the digital asset side of it, but for the transparency, the efficiency, using it in settlements and different things that are going to improve the efficiency of the whole financial system. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing to be looking out for is the decentralized finance, which allows people to be able to basically conduct all of the functions of the traditional financial system, but without the intermediaries being involved. Now, it is still in the early stages, and we see a lot of frauds and a lot of scams and so forth. But the people who are experimenting with decentralized finance and the academics who are working on it are really saying that in the future, as this stabilizes and gets, more appropriately regulated, what do you need banks for? And so I think that there's a big question there about the whole financial system potentially going to change. And there's an academic called Cam Harvey who wrote about the future of decentralized finance. And he's basically saying decentralized finance will replace banks. So that's a transformation that banks need to be thinking about, because also institutions are becoming platforms, no longer single service. I lend you money and you borrow money, and every platform's offering every service. So I think banking is going to be completely disrupted. But I think the other one that's important to talk about is the tokenization. So a lot of work's going on in tokenization of, let's say, gold, silver, precious metals, and tokenization of real estate. So I think we're going to increasingly see the tokenization of different real world assets, and then these being used in digital finance as well. And then the other one is the decentralized physical infrastructure. So the way that people are actually storing their data and getting their compute power is in a decentralized way. So there's a lot of talk going on about distributed physical infrastructure. And then, finally, having said that, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty. So as we know that the financial system is undergoing transformation and will do, different countries are taking very different regulatory positions, even in classification of different types of digital assets. So this is something that's to some extent constraining the ability of this industry to take off, and it's also being handled very differently all around the world. But nevertheless, we're now seeing the ETFs being approved in different countries, Bitcoin ETFs and so forth, and you're seeing the traditional investors getting involved in investing in digital assets, which means they see it as a viable asset class to have in your portfolio. So, I think the future is absolutely assured, but we're still on a rocky road as all these regulatory questions get sorted out.
Absolutely amazing. Yes, indeed, a rocky road. Tell me, please, Jane, you've been recognized as a top thought leader in medtech and blockchain. How do you believe leadership needs to evolve in a world increasingly driven by Web3, AI, and those emerging technologies?
Look, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think there's two things to think about. One is the leadership of a pretty static, stable, centralized organization requires a very different skill set from leadership in a world where tech is growing exponentially and new inventions are coming up every day, and your business, like when ChatGPT came out, suddenly everyone realized that either their whole business or whole segments of their business is now going to be completely disrupted by ChatGPT. So I think, CEOs for the future have to be very different kinds of people, very agile thinkers, very willing to live in this uncertainty, very willing to experiment. And so I think the leadership for the future is going to be quite different and always out there looking. I think the other thing that has been my experience, but I've also seen, is that traditionally leaders were elected by the people, or they were the CEOs of big countries, or they were voted onto the UN Security Council. But what we see now is this whole emergence of this influencer economy, if you like. So if you're a person who's got a point of view that you share publicly on social media, and people are interested in what you're saying and start to follow you, we've got influencers who've got millions of followers, more than most legitimate politicians, and they have the ability to be able to both lead and influence for both good and for bad, and so forth. So I think the whole paradigm for the way we lead the world is changing. And so who can be a leader is anyone who's got a point of view and who finds some followers can be a leader. And so it's really a very interesting world that we're living in. But I think for, people who run governments, people who run the United Nations, and people who run businesses, they really have to educate themselves and get incredibly quickly literate about what is happening in the digital economy and how that's going to impact on their world. Because we even have now network states. Most people don't even know that that exists, because we think about a state as being a geographic location. But now people are building network states that don't exist in any single geographic location. And we have no idea how to govern these things. And so there's a lot of things changing, and we can't assume that what we're leading is going to be the same as what history has handed to us.
Absolutely. Um, Jane, with AI and blockchain being such very, very powerful tools with a huge potential, there is also a significant risk. There are also ethical concerns about how those could be used. And I think we have already seen the damage of fake videos. How do you suggest businesses could strike the right balance between innovation and ethical responsibility?
So the first thing that I want to say, and this is the analogy that I use, I think that technology is like our ancestors when they discovered fire. It had the potential for incredible good. It kept us warm. It fired steam engines so we could have trains. But it was incredibly dangerous as well. It could burn down whole cities. And so we had to learn how to harness the benefits and manage those risks. And so I think we're, in the technological equivalent of discovering fire. So I think the first thing is we can't stop it. It's not going to stop. We can't say our children can't go on the internet because we're going to exclude them from their entire cohort, from the way they socialise and the way they learn. But I think that what we need to do is think really carefully about how to bake ethics into technology, because the risk that we have, ethical questions traditionally was me thinking about a choice that I might make for one person or a family or a small community. But if you get it wrong and the algorithm is biased against a particular group of people, you can be influencing, people at scale. Maybe 100,000 or 1 million people can be influenced by a bad algorithm. And so we need to be thinking about that. And the challenges that I think we have is the people who are building the technology, they have no training in that. They have no necessarily awareness of that. The people who are running the companies are too distant from the technology to actually know what's being built there. So I think that gap has to be bridged. and companies really need to have policies about who sets the standards, who makes the decisions, who actually audits the algorithms to see what data they're trained on and what are the assumptions that they're making. So I think there's a whole role there. I think there's also a lot of thinking that we need to do about, you've mentioned bias and AI, but about data security and data privacy, accountability, who's got our data, how are they using it? As we get into these immersive worlds, they're going to have more data points about us than they ever had before, because they're going to be able to even monitor your response to stimuli, for example. And then they'll put that together with your financial data, they'll put that together with your social media data, and suddenly the companies that control that data know more about you than you. And as a society, we have to start realizing that and then thinking about taking steps. And then the other one, which you've raised, is about protection of children. How do we know who they're talking to in the metaverse, for example? How do we protect them, from predators? All of those questions. And even avatars, do they have rights? Do they have human rights? Are they subject to the law if you commit a crime in the metaverse? Is it subject to the law of the outside world? These are all new things we haven't had to face up to before. And so, these are things that, as businesses, as governments, as a society, we need to be educating ourselves about and thinking about what's the best way to be able to approach it. And I don't know the solution, but what I do know is we should be paying attention, and we should be getting the smartest people that we know trying to put their brains around how you might be able to manage and mitigate those risks.
Absolutely. Jane, if we talk about trust, you know that trust is a key component in the adoption of any new technology. How can businesses, I'd say particularly in traditional industries, how can they build trust with their stakeholders as they transition into blockchain and other emerging technologies?
I think that's a good question. Clearly, this issue about digital identity is critical. And knowing who it is that you're dealing with, and on the converse, them knowing who they're dealing with, is incredibly important. I think any business has to be providing something that's got social utility, because if I'm putting something out there and no one wants to use it, they're not going to come and use my platform. So I think that's because people often talk about how do we get blockchain mass adoption? And my answer is give someone something that they want that solves a problem that they've got. So, financial inclusion is a good example of that, because people couldn't get bank accounts and they had no way to be able to transact, and now they can. And so I think it's really focused around what people need and want, and putting your consumer right in the center of everything that you're doing. So I think there's obviously the back end, there's got to be the trust, and they've got to deliver whatever it is. But in the end, the consumer's going to be the king. The consumer's going to decide who they use and who they don't use, and what services they are going to continue to take from a traditional organisation. So really, really use the data that you have to understand your consumers very well and solve their problems. And then you're going to be successful.
As someone who's always at the cutting edge of technology today, what do you see as the next big frontier in digital transformation? And how do you think businesses can prepare for this?
Look, I think it's back to the consumer, because with the ability that we now have to be able to get more and more and more and more data about consumers and about what they want, 5G is going to bring everything to the consumer far more quickly than what they've ever had it before. And I think consumers are just going to expect everything in the palm of their hand. So my own thinking is mobile first, consumer first, know your consumer, know what they want and what they need, and make them happy every time. So we're going to have, in whatever industry you're in, whether it's automobiles or whether it's travel and tourism, making your consumer happy, keeping them engaged, giving them experiences that make them want to continue to be loyal to your brand, make them feel like they're getting involved in shaping the future of the way you're designing your cars and all of those sorts of things. I mean, all of the technologies will come in, but I think in the end, this highly personalized, curated consumer experience, and the more consumers you have on your platform, it's the network effect. The people with the biggest platforms and the most consumers who keep keeping them happy are going to be the winners in this new world.
Absolutely amazing. So not necessarily the bigger one, the biggest today, but those who keep their customers happiest. Absolutely amazing. With the rapid pace of technological advancement, continuous learning is more important than it has ever been. How do you see education evolving to keep pace with Web3 and blockchain and AI? And how can businesses ensure their workforce stays ahead of the curve?
Well, I think the answer to that has got to be AI and metaverse, and it's got to be highly curated skills-based training. I think that's why I think the whole education system is going to be highly disrupted, because what is the use of an arts degree or an accounting degree or any of these things? We send our children off to do 4 years worth of training to come out with a piece of paper that does not prepare them for the future. And the future's coming so quickly. We're going to move from a jobs-based economy to a skills-based economy, and we need to find ways to rapidly upskill people. And I would put to you that it's going to be through AI and through immersive, intense kind of skills-based training to give people the skills that they need. And people won't have a job for life in the way that, maybe people of my generation did. They're going to have to be constantly reskilling and relearning, and the ability for them to be able to do that is going to be there. And I don't think that's going to come from the universities. I think they're kind of too slow and they're too stuck in their old ways. I think we're going to find, commercial operations platforms, people who are already developing these kinds of educational technologies that are just going to start to zoom ahead. And it's going to have to be constant. And I think that's got an implication for our children, not just for the businesses, because they're going to live in this world of uncertainty, of needing to continuously be upskilled and reskilled. And so they're going to need resilience and they're going to need agility and other things to enable them to be successful in a world that's very different from the world that I grew up in.
Absolutely. Jane, when I'm thinking, after this wonderful discussion with you, when I'm thinking of the potential of integrating AI and blockchain and how those could revolutionize many industries, I'd like to ask you, how do you think these technologies could impact the future of work, particularly in terms of job creation, skills development, and workforce dynamics?
So everyone worries, in every industrial revolution that's taken place to date, everyone worries about what the impact's going to be. And I think that this is no different in that sense. I mean, I think that jobs will change. There's no doubt about that. And we're already seeing that particularly jobs that can be automated will be automated, and they're either going to reduce the amount that need to be done by humans, and so the human role will change. But at the same time, interestingly enough, the American Bureau of Labor and Statistics talked about, the growth jobs of the future. And I'll share that with you because I think it's kind of interesting. So the first one obviously is everything to do with technology and computers and data and so forth. The second one is healthcare, because the need for healthcare and the demands, and we have older, chronically ill people. So there's going to be lots of jobs in healthcare. And the third one, which is interesting, is around every form of human entertainment. So this is more broadly from sports to gaming to massage, to actual concerts and things like that, because people have more leisure time and they want to be entertained. And then the fourth one is technicians to fix all the technology that's been built, and the drones are going to have to get fixed and the solar panels and everything else. So, I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is people will be doing things that machines can't do. So we have to start thinking about like higher order functions around empathy and some of those areas that it's going to be a long time for machines to be able to do. And in many jobs, say, for example, like radiology, some of the actual reading of X-rays will be able to be done by machines, but you're still going to have the higher order interventional radiology, the diagnostic radiologists and so forth, doing that work, not that work. But I think the other thing, which is good news, if you think again about the health system, because my background was in health, clinicians complain so much about the drudgery. They're always having to fill in reports and admin and write patient reports and insurance reports. AI can become your best friend because it can help you do those things and you don't have to do them. And as a clinician, you can spend more time with patients. So I think AI becomes this adjunct to humans to enable the humans to be able to do more, better, more sophisticated, more thoughtful work.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that, Jane. If I may, as the last question, what would you advise our followers, especially those who believe that they might be at risk of losing their jobs to AI? How do you advise them to prepare for that?
Look, I think the answer that I would have is think about the skills that they've got and think about which of those skills, might be able to be built upon or kind of transferred into the digital economy. But I think also start thinking about because a lot of people, for example, now who are developers and programmers and who are working on the metaverse, they learned on YouTube. Like, don't sit there and wait for someone to come and teach you something. We're in a world now where everything's available at our fingertips. And if you think, I think that I'd like to become, I've got these wonderful recipes and I think that I could put them into a virtual reality environment and inspire people about my cooking. So, I used to do this, now I could do that. Get on YouTube, start following people who are talking about the changes that are taking place in different industries and think about where you can fit in that. Because, I think it's the world. No one's going to look out for you. You have to look out for yourself. And so get motivated and get out there and start looking. That's my advice. And don't look in the traditional places. Get on the internet, get on YouTube, follow people on whether it's TikTok or X or Telegram or wherever, people you can learn from. Every morning I'm on a whole lot of different channels and chats and information feeds. Every morning I wake up, that's the first thing I do is what new things can I learn today by going through all of these feeds and things like that. Anyone can do that. That's not a special thing that I'm doing. So make every day a learning opportunity and then start figuring it out.
Dr. Jane Thomason, thank you very much. It was an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.